Good morning, everyone. This is Katie Roper with Caring.com, and I'm happy to welcome you today to our Digital Marketing Academy webinar on the caregiver journey, new senior care insights from our caregiver journey survey, which we flighted earlier this year. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. As usual, this presentation will be available within a few business days, and we'll send to you a link both to the recording and to the slides, which you are welcome to share with your colleagues. Also, as usual, this is a one-way webcast. So we encourage you to ask questions. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and you are free to ask anything you want using the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. This is me. I've met a bunch of you recently. I've been out at a number of conferences, and I'm headed out to a bunch more. So it was great to meet everybody at SMASH and the Home Care Association of America conferences, and I'll also be at CALA and the Private Duty Conference. I've been with Caring for a long time now, after making most of my career in high-tech sales. And I have to say, I'm still trying to get both my mom and my mother-in-law to consider senior housing or in-home care. I am sure that my stories would hold up against any of the stories that you hear so often from adult daughters. So I am definitely living the brand, and anybody who wants to send me tips and tricks, I'm happy to take them. Also, since this is a free webinar, it's now time for you to sit through the commercial. Caring.com is the #1 source for senior care resources online. We get people every month coming to our site to read our articles, to engage with our experts, to join our online support groups, and to read the reviews on our website of our senior housing and home care partners. We sort through those 3 million people and find just the 10,000 or so who are active in market right now for senior care options. And after screening them and doing some discovery, understanding what's driving them today, we send them off to our partners. So if you're not currently receiving leads or referrals from Caring.com and would like to, please let us know by checking the box when you sign out of the webinar. Okay, now let's dive into the meat of things and talk about our Caregiver Journey Survey. This is something we do every year. The audience is people searching online for senior care. We used to restrict this to people searching Caring.com, but in recent years we've expanded that out to people who never find Caring.com and instead engage with one of our partner sites. As many of you know, we have partnerships with sites like aarp.org and Senior Homes and a number of other ones. So some of the people who filled out our survey have never actually engaged with Caring.com, but rather searched for senior care on one of our partner sites. The survey was flighted this summer, and we got just over 2,500 respondents. I'm going to talk today, we'll cover two different topics today. The first is general demographics of caregivers, and the second one are some very specific questions about the caregiver journey as it's experienced by people who are living together with their loved ones, whose loved ones are living independently in their own homes, whose loved ones are already in a senior community, and also those who are caring for themselves. We had a fifth segment in the survey which was professional caregivers, but that was actually a very small percentage of our respondents, and just for time constraints, we're not going to talk about them today. So let's talk about family caregivers. I'm sure it's not going to be surprising to anyone on this call, but it's women age 50 to 70 who are shouldering the brunt of senior care in the United States today, and they are the majority of people who filled out our survey. You can see that over 40% of the people who responded to our survey are adult children or in-laws. About 30% are spouses. That spousal number also disproportionately represents people with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, and it's also where most of the men are. Those caring for themselves are only about 15% of the people who responded to our survey. The care recipients are 61% over age 80. That percentage has been ticking up over the years, and also the age of the family caregiver has been getting older over the years that we've been doing our customer journey survey. I think that's an indication of how many people now are comfortable online. More and more people, even in some of the older age demographics, are using the internet when they need to get information. In past years, we've asked a lot of questions about medical conditions, but honestly, those numbers hadn't changed much in about 5 years. So this year, we focused particularly on memory loss. You can see that almost half the people who engaged with our survey have a loved one with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia already diagnosed. Another 12% had Alzheimer's or dementia suspected but not diagnosed. And only 11% of people had a loved one with no sign of memory loss. Now let's talk about what these people are doing. This is the most frequent answers that we found. We asked some other things, but these were the top ones. And interestingly, the stereotypical caregiving ADLs, activities of daily living, are actually done by relatively few of the people in our survey. Bathing, dressing, toileting, feeding, you know, all these numbers are half or a third the number of people who are running errands, attending medical appointments, managing finances, and paying bills. When we looked at this last year, and these numbers are actually down from last year, and the non-medical, non-ADL things are up, one of the very perceptive people who I shared this data with pointed out that when you need bathing, dressing, toileting, and feeding, you're much more likely to bring in a professional to help you out with that. So thank you to Shelley Laurel for pointing that out to me last year. I think it's a very perceptive insight. Obviously, doing all of those things takes a fair amount of time. More than half of the people who responded to our survey are spending more than 20 hours a week caring for their loved one, and almost 40% are spending more than 30 hours a week. So this is a time-intensive activity. It's also a fairly expensive activity. The financial impact of caregiving is significant. Only 15% of our audience is not providing any financial assistance at all to their loved ones. So 85% of people are helping out in some way. 35% of them are spending between $5,000 and $20,000 every year in caregiving expenses, and 6% are spending more than $50,000. In terms of what they're spending it on, you can see the breakdown here. Some of the interesting things to me, legal services, 22% of people are helping their loved one with the cost of legal services. I was also surprised to see that only 11% of people are helping out with the cost of senior housing. We also asked an open-end. If you wanted to, you had the opportunity to tell us other things you were spending money on. I was interested to see that A number of people actually mentioned they were paying for TV for their loved one. So, you know, all those older people can watch Game of Thrones on HBO. The other thing that got mentioned a number of times was incontinence supplies, and in fact that was so prevalent among the open ends that I think we'll probably ask it as a specific line item in our next year's survey. In addition to financial impact, caregiving impacts people in their careers. Obviously, with caregivers in their 50s and 60s, very many of them are still employed. 25% are employed full-time, and another 9% are employed part-time. And a very interesting stat is that 17% of the people who filled out our survey actually ended up leaving work due to their caregiving responsibilities. You can also see the numbers of people whose work is impacted by caregiving. 79% of caregivers have had to miss work, and 31% had to miss more than 7 days of work. There's also lots of arriving late or leaving early. And as a side note, this was not part of the survey, but at caring.com, a website for caregivers, we see our peak utilization during business hours. So there's clearly, in addition to people arriving late, there's an awful lot of presenteeism going on with people surfing the web during work looking for help with caregiving issues. Okay, that covers the general demographics of caregivers. We're now going to split that 2,500 people into 4 different segments. The segment of people who are living together, which made up almost half of the respondents in the survey. Those whose loved ones are still living independently in their own homes. Those living in a senior community, and people caring for themselves. So let's get started with our biggest segment, those who live together with a loved one. So of the people who are caring for others in our survey, so not the people caring for themselves, but those caring for others, people living together with their loved one are 59% of those caring for others. Of that 59%, over half are spouses. And so the responses are obviously going to be a little different for that segment. But the interesting thing is that 22% of people moved their loved one into their home because of caregiving responsibilities, and another 7% actually moved into their loved one's home. For those people who changed their living situation, we asked them what prompted the move. And to no one's surprise, medical conditions and safety concerns were the biggest. You could obviously, in this question, select more than one if there were multiple things that fed into your decision. One interesting stat, this death of a spouse line, 17% of people said that the death of a spouse contributed to the change in living situation. Remember that number. It'll be different when we talk about people living in a senior community. 2 other line items that ought to be making some people on this call squirm. 10% of people had a bad experience in a senior housing facility and moved their loved one out and into their own home. And 5% of them had a bad experience with an in-home care provider. We also asked people which of these products or services make it possible for you to have your loved one in your home. Over 1/3 of people said this was paid assistance from a professional caregiver. There is your market for in-home care. Physical modification of the home was another big one. And personal emergency response system. This is the plain old help I've fallen and can't get up sort of thing. The high-tech monitoring technology was actually very, very low. One interesting thing, new this year, we asked specifically about internet delivery services for groceries or other things. That would seem like something that people would be using, but relatively few people have gotten on board with the apps and the Amazon Fresh. All right, moving on. Segment number 2 is people whose loved ones are still living independently in their own homes. This was 17% of those caring for others. And of this population, almost 2/3 employ paid caregiving assistance of some type. 45% of the 59% use an in-home care agency. 30% employ a private caregiver, so not an agency, but still someone who's a professional caregiver just working independently. And 25% pay a non-professional to provide care in the home for their loved ones who are still living independently. Huge market here. So again, we ask this segment of the audience, how do they cope with their loved ones living independently? And we've talked about what a big part of coping paid assistance from a caregiving agency. The other big thing here was personal emergency response systems. 25% of people whose loved ones are living independently use the plain old help I've fallen and can't get up service, the PERS. We also see in this segment transportation services and volunteer visiting and meal services being important elements in making it all work. Also very low uptake on the high-tech things like internet delivery services and the many of the other technologies we asked about were 2, 3, 4% and didn't even make it onto the slide. Segment number 3, the people whose loved ones are living already in senior housing. This was 22% of the people who were caring for others and responded to our survey. The first question we asked these people was, where was your loved one living prior to their move to senior housing? And almost 2/3 of them were living independently in their own home. The number of people who lived with their adult child or with another relative was much, much smaller. This was a similar finding to what we saw last year, which is you typically either move in with your adult daughter or you move into a senior community, but it's much less common to make first one move and then another move. One number that was very surprising and a new question for us this year was to see that 15% of people moved from a different senior community into the one that they're in now. So they either picked wrong with their first community choice or their care needs changed and the original community couldn't accommodate them anymore. That was a very surprising number, particularly because we separately asked about people moving from a hospital or nursing home into a senior housing community, and that number was only 3%. So that 15% is a clean number of people who moved from one senior housing community into another one. We also asked what prompted the move to senior housing. And similar to the other times that we've asked this question, it's medical concerns and safety concerns that are driving these decisions. These numbers are actually going up. Last year, medical concerns was about 62%. So despite all of the efforts in the industry to sell the value of socialization and community living, it's still medical and safety drivers that are the key factor in these decisions, and it's getting to be more frequent rather than less frequent. At about half the rate is transportation or mobility issues. So if you're not concerned about medical condition, it's typically transportation or mobility that is the driver. Death of a spouse. Remember we talked about death of a spouse triggering 17% of people to move in with their loved ones. Death of a spouse is only 11% of the moves to senior housing. So medical conditions much outweigh that. The lifestyle choices of wanting to be close to family members or wanting to downsize, very small elements in this decision. Similar to last year, we asked how long the decision took people from the time they first started searching for senior care until they moved in. And this data is very similar to what we see in our own statistics. Roughly a third of people have an immediate need and move in less than a month. Another third move in between 1 and 6 months, and the rest of the stragglers come in sometimes years and years in the future. We asked about which tools or resources did you use in your search for senior care. Remember, these are all people who are using internet resources to search for care. So 100% of people have used something online. But the interesting number here is that 41% of people said their own local knowledge of communities in the area was something they leveraged in the search. I have people all the time who say, I don't need to market online because everybody in my community already knows me. What this says is that almost 60% of people don't know any local communities in the area, or at least not ones that they would feel comfortable with using in their search for senior care. Recommendations from friends or family members, another 40%. Those are your word-of-mouth referrals, which everyone loves. Online directories, 25% of people, that was the third most prevalent choice. And it actually edged out those professional recommendations. So while everybody loves professional recommendations, they were only a factor for 22% of the people who moved their loved one to a senior community. Consumer reviews, these are the online reviews. 20% of people said that they relied on consumer reviews as an element of their search. And again, that's much higher than the recommendations from senior care experts. Another interesting thing was the small number of people relatively whose loved one picked the community themselves. This isn't from year to year. So it's among the people who are searching online for senior care, relatively few of the older folks have already picked out the community that they'll be moving to. I was recently at SMASH, the Senior Housing Marketing Conference, and there was a lot of talk about mobile devices and how important it is to have your website optimized for mobile. Well, it is important, but interestingly, not that many people are really relying on their smartphones or even their tablets to search for senior housing. Laptop computers and desktop computers are overwhelmingly the tool of choice for people in this age group searching online. So while it's definitely important that your website be mobile optimized, if it's not a sort of hair on fire, drop everything and make it so decision, because most people are still using desktop or laptop computers. This is an interesting question, and it's similar to one that we've already been through. But we asked an open-ended, not which tools did you use, but why did you pick the community that you picked? And we didn't prompt them with anything. We didn't. This was an empty text box, and they could type in their answers. We read through all of those answers and categorized them into this list of options. And what you can see is that the location of the community is overwhelmingly the driving factor in terms of which one was selected. 22% of people specifically mentioned location as the first thing in an unprompted response. And a third of them mentioned it somewhere in their list of reasons. Reputation and specifically online reviews was also the first thing that 12% of people mentioned, and 24% of people mentioned it at some point in their discussion of why they selected that community. So don't ignore online reviews. And as you can see, it's even higher than people who said, well, the staff was so nice, and that's why I picked this community. Cost, similarly, was mentioned by only 12% of people. And now it may have been the deciding reason in more choices than that, but it's not something that people, when they look back on their decision, highlight as the reason they picked one community over the other. Another thing, I hate to tell you, the chandelier in the lobby, nobody really cared about. Physical facility was mentioned in only 10% of cases, and many of those were people saying, well, I liked the particular apartment layout, or it was sunny, or had a garden or something like that. Your well-appointed lobby is not moving the needle. Care needs, too, were only mentioned by 8% of people. I found that very interesting because, of course, medical issues were the reason that people moved, but for whatever reason, they're not translating that into the reason that they're choosing the community. Cleanliness was called out, 6% of people. I found that surprising because, again, it was unprompted. So clearly that was something people care about. And amazingly, there were very, very few mentions of anything like religious affiliation, the salesperson doing a great job. Hardly anyone mentioned that. Hardly anyone commented on the food. I don't know if that's because it's just an expectation that the food would be good, or whether it didn't really factor into their decision, or it's not something that they would remember. This was an interesting thing we found this year. We specifically asked the people with a loved one in a senior community whether they employ an outside agency to provide care, and 7% of them said they did. So home care partners, there you go. There's your professional referrals. I didn't talk a lot about attitude this year, but we have asked attitude questions, and last year we did a real deep dive into people's attitudes towards their living situation. And similar to last year, the people whose loved ones are living in a senior community are the happiest in our survey. They're pleased that the loved one is safe and well cared for. Over a third say it's a great option for everyone. On the flip side, though, about a third said they felt sad or guilty that they couldn't care for the loved one themselves. And another third said, my loved one is unhappy, but we had no other options. So it's kind of a good news, bad news situation. While most people are pleased, there's a significant chunk for whom it's not working out so well, but they had no other choice. Because it's so important, I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about reviews. When people said they had used reviews in their search, we asked them, which review sources do you trust the most? And almost half of them said they trust reviews on senior care websites. I realize it's very self-serving, but there you have it. Almost half of people would trust a review on a senior care website like caring.com over a review posted on a general site. The second most trusted choice was the senior living community's own website. A number of our partners are putting reviews on their websites, and I would encourage you to do so because 20% of people look for those as a trusted source. Whenever you go to an industry conference or a presentation on review sites, there's lots of talk about Yelp and Google. But I have to tell you, among this audience, people whose loved ones are living in a senior community, only 12% of them use reviews and trust reviews on general review sites. So all of those reviews that you're killing yourself to post on Yelp and Google There's other reasons to do it. You may want to do it because of SEO, but it's not where 50-year-old women go when they want a trusted source of opinions on senior care companies. Finally, only 2% of them trust reviews on Facebook. 19% selected other, and many of those specifically mentioned Medicare.gov or wrote in something about professional referral source. Another real important point on reviews is responding and monitoring. 32% of the people who used reviews as a tool in their senior care search said that when they see a business's response to a review, it lets me know the business cares and is listening. But almost a third of them said they didn't think they'd ever seen a business respond to a review. Please do take these seriously, and please do respond to reviews when they're posted. You can use a third-party reputation management tool. Caring.com makes it easy for our clients to respond to reviews that are posted on our website, and some people actually use an agency or someone like that to post responses to reviews. However you do it, it's a really good thing to do, and 32% of people really appreciate it when it happens. Okay, the fourth segment are people caring for themselves. This is actually a small percentage of our audience, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them. The interesting stat here is that 25% of them are starting to think about other options due to health or safety concerns. Remember the 70% of people who changed their living situation because of health and safety concerns? Well, here they come. A similar percentage feel stuck in their current living situation. They may or may not be stuck. They may not know the resources that are out there to help them care for themselves. So, but the marketing isn't reaching them. This segment was the least satisfied of any of the segments in our survey. Only 29% of them are satisfied with their current situation. And for senior housing marketers, here are some reasons they'd be thinking about a change. 22% of them are interested in a senior community for comfort, convenience, or companionship. 20% are worried about their own health and safety, but 20% of them think they have no other choice than to live where they're living on their own. Okay, that was a lot of information, and I went through it quickly. So I want to pause now and see if anyone has questions on this data or on anything else. We have a lot of other topics that we covered in the survey, so if you want to ask questions, you're welcome to, and if I don't have the data at my fingertips, I can go back and take a look for it. All right, if you think of anything and want to email me, that's fine. With that, I'm going to move on and put in a plug for our next Digital Marketing Academy. This is one for our home care partners, the Pulse of the Home Care Client, Service Trends for Agencies. It's coming up in 2 weeks. My colleague Denise will be the one running it. For the senior housing companies on this call, we've got a webinar coming up with Tony Mullen on getting to 100% occupancy. You can get information on that one on our partner blog. You can see the URL there, partners.caring.com/events. Thank you, everyone. Look for our resources online. Join us on a future webinar, or feel free to reach out to me at any of these points, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.